The crystal stemware shattered against the marble floor as my sister-in-law's laughter pierced the dining room. "How can you still be single at 35? She sneered, her manicured fingers gesturing at my simple dress. "Maybe if you didn't have so much baggage, men would actually want you." My heart hammered against my ribs as 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me, their judgment cold as the December air seeping through the mansion's windows. My daughter Emma's face crumpled beside me. "At least some of us don't need Daddy's money to survive," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sudden silence. I was a single mother. What they didn't know could destroy them all. Before we begin, if you enjoy true and exciting stories like this one, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Write in the comments what city or country you are watching from. Now, let's get to the beginning of this story. The Blackwood family estate sat like a monument to old money, its Georgian columns gleaming white against perfectly manicured lawns. Inside, everything whispered wealth, Persian rugs that cost more than most people's cars, oil paintings worth 6 figures, and silverware that had been passed down through 5 generations. I'd married into this world once, when I was young and naive enough to believe love could bridge any gap. The dining room stretched endlessly under its crystal chandelier, casting fractured rainbows across faces that smiled with their mouths, but never their eyes. Every surface gleamed, from the mahogany table that could seat 30 to the gold-rimmed china that reflected our distorted images back at us. My ex-husband Richard sat at the head of the table, his new wife Caroline beside him, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light as she cut her filet mignon with surgical precision. Their conversations flowed like expensive wine, smooth, practiced, and leaving a bitter aftertaste. Emma sat beside me, her shoulders hunched as she picked at her food, trying to make herself invisible in this palace of perfection. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked ominously, counting down moments until someone would inevitably say something cruel. Nothing in this house had warmth, not the marble floors, not the formal portraits staring down at us, and certainly not the hearts of the people who called it home. The cracks started small, as they always did in the Blackwood family. Richard's mother, Eleanor, had perfected the art of the backhanded compliment over 70 years of practice. "How lovely that you're still making it work on your teacher's salary," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "It must be so." Character building. Caroline's sister, Jessica, chimed in with her own brand of poison. "I just don't understand how women do it alone these days. Don't you want Emma to have a father figure?" Each word was carefully chosen, designed to cut without leaving visible wounds. Emma's fork trembled in her small hand as she pushed peas around her plate, creating tiny green patterns that seemed to mirror the chaos in my chest. I noticed how Richard never intervened, how he studied his wine glass with the intensity of a scholar examining ancient texts. The conversation turned to their upcoming vacation to the Maldives, their new yacht, their charity galas where they rubbed shoulders with senators and celebrities. With each story, the distance between my world and theirs grew wider. A single white rose sat in a crystal vase at the table's center, its petals beginning to brown at the edges. A perfect metaphor for this family's facade of beauty hiding inevitable decay. The rose would appear again and again in my life, a symbol of things that looked perfect but were slowly dying inside. The attacks became more direct as the evening progressed and the wine loosened tongues. "You know," Jessica said, leaning back in her chair with predatory satisfaction, "I was just telling my book club about single mothers and their challenges. The statistics are really quite alarming." Richard's brother Michael nodded sagely, as if he'd researched the topic extensively. "Children from broken homes often struggle academically. It's unfortunate, but it's the reality." I felt Emma shrink beside me, her breath becoming shallow and quick. "Emma's doing just fine," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. Caroline laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "Oh, please, Sarah, living in that tiny apartment, driving that ancient car, wearing clothes from Target. How is any of that fine?" The chandelier above us seemed to dim as their words created shadows across Emma's young face. She was only 9, but she understood enough to know they were talking about her life, our life, as if it were something shameful and broken. The room felt smaller now, the walls pressing in with each cruel observation, each pitying glance, each moment of manufactured concern that masked genuine cruelty. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, steady and strong, like a war drum preparing for battle. Then, Jessica delivered the killing blow, her voice carrying across the table with devastating precision. "Honestly, Sarah, how can you still be single at your age? Any decent man would run from a woman with that much baggage. Maybe it's time to accept that some women just aren't meant for happiness." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft sound of Emma beginning to cry. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward us, some filled with cruel satisfaction, others with uncomfortable embarrassment, but none with genuine compassion. I watched my daughter's shoulders shake as 9 years of subtle family disapproval finally crystallized into this moment of absolute rejection. The chandelier cast fractured light across their faces, making them look like broken dolls in an expensive dollhouse. Richard sat frozen, his loyalty to his family trumping any lingering decency he might have felt toward the woman who had once loved him unconditionally. Time moved in slow motion as I realized that the woman who had spent years apologizing for her existence, who had begged for scraps of acceptance from people who saw her as inferior, had just drawn her final breath. What they didn't know, what none of them could possibly imagine, was that the woman sitting at their table in Target clothes and driving an old Honda was about to inherit something that would make their family fortune look like pocket change. I didn't speak for the rest of dinner. I simply watched as they continued their performance, their comfortable cruelty flowing around Emma and me like cold water around stones. We left quietly, my daughter's tear-stained face turned away from their satisfied smirks. In the car, Emma finally broke down completely. "Mommy, are we really broken?" she sobbed, her small hands fisted in her lap. I pulled over and held her until her crying subsided, feeling something crystalline and unbreakable forming in my chest where hurt used to live. That night, after Emma fell asleep, I sat in our small kitchen and opened the letter that had arrived 3 days earlier. The letter I hadn't had time to read properly, the letter from the law firm in Switzerland. My grandfather Heinrich, whom I'd met only once as a child, had died at 97. He'd left me something unexpected, a trust fund worth $47 million, accumulated through decades of careful investments in technology companies that were now household names. The old man had been watching me, the lawyer explained, proud of how I'd raised Emma alone, impressed by my strength and independence. The money came with one condition. I had to prove myself worthy by demonstrating grace under pressure. I smiled in the darkness of my tiny apartment, understanding that tonight's dinner had been my final test. My brother David worked as an investigative journalist for the Washington Herald, and he'd always harbored suspicions about Richard's family business practices. "I've been waiting for you to ask," he said when I called him the next morning. Within a week, David had assembled a team of forensic accountants and legal experts. What they discovered was staggering. The Blackwood family fortune was built on a foundation of lies that stretched back 30 years. Tax evasion schemes that had cheated the government out of millions, charity foundations that existed only on paper while the money flowed into offshore accounts, and business partnerships with companies known for exploiting workers in developing countries. Richard's father had covered his tracks well, but digital evidence never truly disappears. It just waits for someone smart enough to find it. David's contacts in federal law enforcement were very interested in the files we uncovered. The Blackwoods had been living off stolen money for decades, presenting themselves as pillars of the community while secretly robbing from the very causes they claimed to support. The white rose from that dinner table kept appearing in my thoughts. Beautiful on the surface, rotten at its core, exactly like the family that had scorned me for not having enough money when their entire fortune was built on theft. For 2 weeks, I maintained my normal routine with almost supernatural calm. I taught my 3rd grade class, helped Emma with homework, and attended parent-teacher conferences as if nothing had changed. When Eleanor Blackwood called to check on Emma after that unfortunate evening, I was polite and gracious. When Caroline texted me with fake concern about our difficult situation, I responded with genuine gratitude for her thoughtfulness. Meanwhile, David's team worked around the clock, building an airtight case with the help of federal investigators who'd been tracking suspicious financial patterns for years. The irony was delicious. While Richard's family planned their next vacation and Caroline shopped for another tennis bracelet, I was quietly signing papers that would transfer my inheritance into investment accounts that would double my wealth within 5 years. I bought a small recording device and wore it to every family gathering, collecting evidence of their casual admissions about money transfers and business dealings they thought were too sophisticated for a simple schoolteacher to understand. While they sipped champagne and mocked my second-hand furniture, I was building a fortress of evidence that would bring their empire crashing down like a house of cards in a hurricane. The first domino fell on a Tuesday morning when federal agents arrived at Blackwood Industries with search warrants and seizure orders. Richard called me, his voice shaking with panic and rage. "Sarah, they're saying someone provided information about our finances. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" I could hear Caroline sobbing in the background as agents inventoried their belongings. By afternoon, the local news channels were running stories about the Blackwood family's arrest for massive tax fraud and embezzlement. Their assets were frozen, their country club memberships revoked, their social circle abandoning them like rats fleeing a sinking ship. David's articles ran in papers across the country, each revelation more damaging than the last. The Charity Foundation scandal made national headlines when investigators discovered that money intended for children's hospitals had been used to buy Caroline's jewelry collection. I watched it all unfold from my classroom, teaching my students about perseverance and justice while their world crumbled in real time. The white roses in the school garden were blooming that day, fresh and clean in the morning sunlight. Nothing like the dying flower that had sat on their dinner table the night they tried to break my spirit. 6 months later, Emma and I moved into our new home, not a mansion, but a warm, bright house with a garden where we could plant vegetables and watch things grow. The legal proceedings had concluded with Richard serving 5 years in federal prison and his family's assets distributed among the charities they had defrauded. I had quietly donated $10 million to various educational foundations, ensuring that other single mothers would have access to resources I'd never had. Emma's new school was filled with children from all kinds of families, and she'd made friends who didn't care about trust funds or charity galas. We spent Saturday mornings at the farmer's market, selecting ingredients for meals we'd cook together, laughing as flour dusted our countertops and filling our home with the aroma of fresh bread. In the evenings, we'd sit on our front porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, while Emma told me about her dreams and fears without worrying that someone would judge her for being from a broken home. The white roses in our garden bloomed magnificently that spring, their petals pure and unstained, beautiful because they grew from honest soil nurtured by hands that had earned the right to tend them. Emma smiled now without reservation, secure in the knowledge that she was loved completely and unconditionally, exactly as she was. And you? What do you think? Did she do the right thing? What would you have done in her place? If this story touched you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us what you thought in the comments. Your support is what helps us continue bringing you exciting stories like this one. Now watch other stories on screen. We'll see you next time, with love and respect.